Hey everyone, Brandflex here, back with a new Eternal Return video. Today's video is going to be hopefully super fast and also super low effort. I just got back from my trip, but I still wanted to cover patch 1.33, as well as briefly touch on my first impression of Yumin. I'll make a full Yumin video in a few days, but let's just get through this real quick so I can get some rest. So, starting off, we do have our new character, Yumin. He is going to be an Arcana character who will revolve mostly around his Q and W abilities. His E will drop a field that you see here. They'll give you movement speed and empower your next Q or W. And his E is just a little dash that does a bit of damage if anyone's within 5 meters of your landing zone, and also gets its cooldown reduced by 1 second every time you hit an ability. And it's important to know that this ability or cooldown reduction does not affect his E, but it will affect everything else. So you still get a lot of value from using cooldown reduction or having cooldown reduction in all of your spells. Just keep in mind that if you're looking to use Stellar Charge to use E twice really quickly, Stellar Charge won't work on E because it's a fixed cooldown ability. And his ultimate, his ultimate seems fine, but I'll be honest, it looks kind of optional unless you want to win a fight harder. So very similar to Lenore, where if you hit the ultimate very efficiently, you'll probably win a fight, but if you don't, then just play the basic abilities easier. But yeah, like I said, go through that more in detail when I actually make that video. Prison Warden, or Prison Guard Bianca has finally released, so interesting skin. I'm not a Bianca player, so I probably won't be using it, but I know that a lot of Bianca players do like it a lot. We have the Yumin emotes and also some random box changes. I don't know how much you guys hear about box changes, but I don't care at all. I barely open them now as well, so I'll probably wait until a BP premium skin is interesting again to really spam them. A lot of random UI changes, so expanded map, visibility improvements. Upcoming objectives will be made more visible, cube icons will be more clear, and then food supply will be a bit less obvious, just because I guess food supply isn't a big deal. And then map background will be darkened so that you can see everything else more clear. Toggle find character function. It looks like I actually don't know what this is. So when you try and find your character for spacebar, I guess you can disable it. Oh, I see. So it's like a little, I guess like show light indicator. When you press spacebar, you can now disable that if you want to, just because it is a little bit of extra clutter that some people don't want. You can now also move your minimap or your chat window around a little bit. So like League of Legends, if you ever played the game League with like your chat window in the middle, now you can now reflect that as well. And now you can also ping items. Pinging items is interesting. I guess this is kind of like Final Fantasy or Maple Story 2, if you guys ever played that, where people can ping the item and then others can click on it or hover it to show what the stats are. Going into matchmaking, Asia 1 has a bit stricter matchmaking for the high elos. North America can now finally queue diamonds with meteors, which was a mistake from the previous patch. So hopefully I can now climb out of Diamond 3 at a pace of more than 1 game per year. Europe will also now have a bit more strict matchmaking, with meteor no longer being matched with Diamond 3 or lower, which seems incorrect because that means Europe has a stricter matchmaking than, oh no, it's meteor plus. Okay, so maybe there's an oversight with Meteor itself with Diamond, because this should be Mithril Plus and not Meteor Plus. We'll see if they fix that quickly. Ranked pre-mades, only Asia now has it. In North America, South America, and Europe, you can only do Platinum. Oversight by Nimble Neuron to let it happen to lesser played regions, sadly. And now box rewards, this is just more gacha stuff from the game itself. Moving forward to actual gameplay, they're going to be deleting, or rather, they're going to be making it so that Alpha and Omega will no longer appear in zone schedule for restricted area release, which is actually a walkback from their previous patch or previous patch or two ago, where they made it so that Alpha and Omega would spawn in closing areas. And now Wicklin will no longer open up in those orange zones that will turn red. She'll now always search for clear zones if they are able to exist. So good on Nimble to finally fix that. Lumi moves a little bit faster, and in exchange, her stopping range will be a bit bigger. So if you're trying to find her in the late game scenarios where it's like day 4 and trying to res your teammates, you shouldn't have to walk as far to get her to stop, but she will just basically move a lot faster throughout the map. So be careful of that if you're trying that. and she now has a selection at a restaurant. So instead of just mocha bread, you're gonna have hamburgers and scrambled eggs as well. And it looks like hamburgers are a little stronger than mocha breads and scrambled eggs. So maybe keep an eye out for the hamburgers if you want to look at her in the briefing room. Bats are being nerfed a little bit. Mutant bats are unchanged, but binoculars and gunpowders were kind of insane when they dropped a lot from the bats. So reducing vision just up by a little bit. Rainy weather is being reduced just because I guess people were. I'm assuming this is more of a PC problem where rainy weather would break a lot of PCs because because rain historically has an effect of slowing down computers, and then cloudy and sandstorm will be slightly increased to compensate. Gadgets. Flare gun, a bit more risky now. You have to wait a minute instead of 45 seconds, and more people can see it now, which is good because Flare gun R, which is the red box on top of a person who activates it, was a lot of power for very low risk, in my opinion. It was like every 4 attempts that I saw with Flare gun where people actually got jumps, so I'm happy they're buffing that, or nerfing it rather. Ghostlight is being changed so that you have to deal 35% of someone's HP to trigger it, which is ironically as much of a buff as it is a nerf, because this means that if you only have to deal 30% of someone to kill them, then you won't trigger Ghostlight anymore. But you always want to trigger. But if you're trying to use Ghostlight as a poking tool, it's a bit harder. But Ghostlight should be a tool that's better used for all-ins where you do a lot of damage. So assassin characters that were using Ghostlight will be pretty happy, but poke characters who use Ghostlight will be pretty sad because now obviously poking is a bit harder to do, and assassinating, you don't accidentally waste Ghostlight for 5% more of a range, which is always nice. Power Crescendo is getting a well-deserved nerf. -4 at the very end is pretty powerful. That's 4 AP and 8 amp late game. This rune was ridiculous. Everyone was running it at a certain point if they wanted to scale, so it's good they nerfed it now, even though it's a bit sad that we're losing a late game scaling rune. Healing factor, getting 5% more effectiveness is fine in a vacuum, but as we'll see as we go down, this is actually a pretty massive buff to all healers, so I'll be surprised to see whether or not we get a healer meta going into next patch, which is interesting just because I did rate all the healers low, so maybe this bumps them up all by one tier in the future. Electric Shift is getting a buff to its early game, so level 1 has 2 seconds longer of a duration, and if you aggressively use E-Shift for the buff, you'll definitely notice this, so welcome change to E-Shift to put it a bit better over Blink, or closer to Blink. Garnet is going to get a tiny buff to the first cast of her Q, so you're going to get 5% more damage, which is kind of a revert from a previous nerf. Totally fine. Garnet should probably deal more damage instead of taking more, so I'm okay with that myself. Nathapon's Q is going to do 5% more amp, which is really big because his passive scales up his damage dealt. Daniel is going to get a pretty decent E-nerf. 20 less damage is going to matter a lot because it stacks on his W, and obviously as an assassin, him being able to kill and not being able to kill more consistently is a big deal. Darko is getting a tiny buff. I think he's pretty strong, but I think he's not popular in Korea. We're not performing well, so he gets a buff, which is not surprising. Debi Marlene going to get a pretty massive nerf, -10 damage to her paint. It's a big deal purely because you will constantly apply all of your paint stacks for the most part in every fight. So this is like -50 damage a lot of the time. So in a fight, you might lose hundreds of damages because of this alone. So pretty big Debi Marlene nerf, probably because of her popularity, but she has pretty scary a lot of the time. Laura is underperforming just because they had to shaft her after they made her the best squad character in the game. Plus 20 damage base is pretty good. We'll see if she becomes a problem again. Rozzi got nerfed really hard because of Radar Sins. Plus 5% to her second hit is going to matter a lot, but we'll see if it matters as much as it should. Dailin is getting a pretty funny buff. This is the equivalent of +5 movement speed to Irelia and -5 movement speed to Irelia in a Eternal Return, essentially just making Dailin's ultimate stronger and weaker based on how good she is in the meta. This is a pretty massive buff. I don't think this will make Dailin competitive in pre-mades, but it'll make her a lot scarier in solo queue because a lot of Dailin games, she stacks a lot of AP, and this is just +15%, and that's gonna matter a lot because that's +15% times 4. So it's actually 60% AP. So any generic Dailin build will cap out around 330 AP. So just off that alone, you're already potentially doing 150 more on the execute, which is massive for someone like Dailin. Rio is getting a huge buff. I think this makes Rio meta, just straight up. Very funny. Martina has been scaring Koreans finally, so she's finally getting nerfed. NA has known about this for a while, so Korea finally catching up is always ironic. So -5% to her passive is going to multiply by 4. So she essentially loses 20% attack power per auto attack, which is massive, but she does a ton of damage. So we'll see if that matters that much. Markus, same buff as Darko, gonna get a tiny buff because he's not as good in Korea. And Barbara has lost a lot of popularity in the past few weeks, so she's getting a tiny buff to compensate. Passive gonna deal 5% more damage. W gonna be 1 second shorter cooldown, which is massive because this means that you'll have the same cooldown as if your turrets had autoed twice. So a lot more W spam. We'll see if it fixes her and makes her more popular. Bernice is gonna get 2 AP, which is really funny, and also get his Q slow increased. So number one, really trying to push a ADC or range attacker meta for this patch, it looks like. Bianca is going to get a pretty massive buff to her second hit on the lance. This doesn't hit that often if you don't hit the first hit or if you don't get the root off, but it will matter a lot because 3% more damage stacks up pretty quickly, especially if your ult is down. And speaking of ult, she'll do 3% more damage on her ult on her ult initial hit. So when she rams into you with her E, she'll do 3%. So her full combo is looking like it'll get 6% more max HP damage. And since this is AoE, and since these spells are not hard to hit if you're aiming well, 6% more HP is a lot of damage. Like, this is just 6% wholesale. So we'll see if she's going to be a problem in solo queue and comp with that. So Adela is being nerfed, which is really funny because Lockney explained 2 patches ago when Adela first got the Q buff to cooldown. Lockney, she said that this buff was terrible because it would spike Adela's play rate, and also Adela was perfectly fine. And Nimble Neuron, instead of walking back that cooldown reduction buff, is now nerfing everything about Adela around it. So Pawn, -20, massive nerf. Queen, -5%. Skill Amp, massive nerf. And then the durations being nerfed is even worse because you can now stack 1 less pawn and queen for like map clutter and bursting characters. So that's a huge nerf. So all the pieces are getting -2 seconds, which is horrific nerf. Her E is also losing a ton of damage, 30 off the base and 5% off the scaling. And this is big because the max damage on Adele's combo was Q into E into W. And then what would happen is that W would echo her E damage. So the fact that the E is losing a ton of damage means that she won't be able to one-shot you as easily, which is probably a fair nerf, but a lot bigger than it might seem at first. Arda is getting a buff because they probably over-nerfed him last time they nerfed him. His Amp is going to get a tiny revert, going to get plus 0.2%, which is still down from the 0.4% loss he got a few patches ago, but still a good buff. And his Q is going to be a lot faster. This is pretty big because it's really easy to dodge Arda's Q by accident if you're really far away. So making this even faster means his passive will be more consistent. So they're moving Arda's power level a little bit in an interesting way. Abigail is finally popular in Korea and doing well, so they're nerfing her E damage by 40, which is huge because she'll cast us a lot in every fight. So just imagine she marks you with W and she ults you, that's -80 damage already, which is crazy. Might even be more. It's actually -120 if she uses the last E, so very big deal. We'll see how bad she's hindered by that. And Aya is going to get a -1 cooldown on Q, which is really big for a pistol and sniper, as they note. Isol is also going to get a tiny buff to his AP side or his amp side, plus 10% skill amp, funny climbing of his E throughout the patches. Maybe Isol will actually one-shot you with his auto attack, or Pistol Isol will one-shot you with his auto attacks. Isaac is going to get -30 base defense, which is ironic because he's getting a new Mithril Tonfa that we'll see later on. So while this is a nerf, he's probably buffed overall with the new Tonfa. Echion is getting a tiny buff, or not tiny, a pretty big buff to his E damage. This means that when he bounces on people and hits multiple people, he's getting 10% attack power. And traditionally, Echion doesn't really build much attack power on his most popular variant, which is Black Mamba, I believe. But Death Adder, which is the auto attack version, and then Sidewinder, which is the more casty version, will build a lot of attack power. So this is really good for those versions. But even on Black Mamba, he'll get like plus 15 damage at least overall. William's passive, which is the 3 stacks of balls, they're nerfing it because at least as showed in ERM, I only discovered it in ERM, but apparently Williams have known about this for a while. You could just spam W and permanently maintain his fastball stacks. So they're nerfing it so they can no longer do that, which is a massive William nerf. So we'll see how bad William is after this. Probably get a compensation buff like Rio did, plus 4 AP for fun. Irem is going to finally get a nerf, 5% off her skill amp. She's been doing well for like the entire last 2 seasons, so this is long overdue of a nerf, and it's a tiny nerf as well. Leon is getting a tiny nerf as well. Her W in her ghost form, which is the wide swing, is going to get -5% attack power, which is huge because this is your most spammed ability while in that form. Jackie is getting another buff to her E. Got to make it shorter if you don't get resets, which is always nice. Tsubame is going to get a 1% damage buff to her passive when you max it, and 0.5% at level 2. 1% every 4 attacks ish is pretty big, but we'll see if it actually matters that much overall. Camilo is getting a 5% damage reduction increase to his ultimate, which can matter a lot just because he tends to soak a lot of damage when he presses R, so we'll see if that 5% moves his needle a lot. Katja is getting 0.2% more to her auto attacks, which is really scary because I think Katja is still one of the better ADCs. It's just that anyone plays her, so her stats are bad because she's the most accessible ADC, so interesting buff there. Karla is going to get a tiny buff as well. She isn't getting played that much, plus 5% damage to her max charge damage on her passive. Won't add up that quickly, but you'll definitely notice it if you're dying a bit more consistently. Fiora is going to get a 0.2% increase to her rapier mastery, which is pretty relevant because spear and two-hand are probably fine. So they're doing this game where they just make a bunch of random weapons on all the, like, basically the character plays the same on all 3 weapons. So they're trying to make it so that one weapon is going to be more played than the others, and they're looking like they're going to do that with rapier over the next few patches. Hart is getting a tiny nerf, thank god. She's been super overtuned, which is ironic because they said that was going to be a range carry meta, but Hart will still probably be one of the better range carries. She's just being brought down a little bit because she has insane play rate, pick rate, win rate, gain rate over Korea, so not that surprising she finally got nerfed. And Hyunwoo is getting a very small buff for auto attack Hyunwoo and a very small nerf for Tonfa Hyunwoo. Minus 10% skill amp on Q is really big because that's Hyunwoo's most consistent Tonfa damage output, but getting 3 attack power is going to be really nice for Glove Hyunwoo. Moving on to weapons, Purple Haze losing 50% regen, or getting regen adjusted, probably won't matter at all. The Wall is getting -2 to duration to Vigor. I guess Vigor overall is getting reduction from 7 seconds to 5 seconds because it's too easy to maintain for any character in the game. So they're just reducing that a little bit. Dagger is getting a new amp item called Malice, which is essentially the Inquisitor effect on a weapon for Mithril, which is absolutely terrifying. 40% below max HP is not hard to do for a lot of the Assassin Dagger characters, and you're getting a 20% increase with that. That is crazy. That's a lot of damage being dealt, especially since a lot of the Amp Daggers aren't really used that well. The main thing is that this doesn't have a cooldown reduction, so they're going to have to find CDR somewhere else, which comes in many forms for mages. Assault Rifle is getting a new weapon, tree weapon, that comes with Vigor. I've seen a lot of complaints about this, that this AR is kind of overtuned for a tree weapon, so we'll see if they nerf it quickly. I don't know if it's that big of a deal. I feel like all attack weapons kind of end up being the same in the end. It's just whether, and if they're too overtuned, then they'll nerf it like they did with Hart's new Mithril guitar from last patch. Hammer, new Amp Hammer, Mithril, gonna be Cataclysm with a lot of HP. Gonna be essentially the Hammer Sua's version of the Bat Sua weapon that she already builds. So I guess they're just trying to make Hammer Sua better with this. And maybe Amp Magnus. I don't know how many Hammer mage characters exist off the top of my head, but they're just adding more effects as they said they would, so that's always good. Arcana, all the healer Arcanas are gonna get a pretty big buff with the sun. Even Arda counts with this. Healing power scales very, very well with the newly buffed heal factor. So the fact they're giving healing mages a new upgrade, which will massively increase their output because of the skill amp increase, it's gonna be really scary. I think supports and ADCs might be really meta next patch, but we'll see how willing people are to funnel their supports. Dainsleif Crimson is getting a -3 adaptability nerf. This is more of a Debi Marley nerf than anything. Sniper Rifle is getting another amp variant, so this is going to be Theodore and Sniper Aya. It's going to be attack speed, which is going to be benefiting Sniper Aya, obviously Theodore as well, but it's mostly for the Magnetic Midnight, where now when you auto someone, you're going to do a lot more damage because you get the skill amp percent, but you're also going to slow them for 20%. So this allows Sniper Aya to opt out of Scotty, and also lets Theodore kind of lead people a bit better when he doesn't land his route. So we'll see how much this affects the sniper amps in the future. Widowmaker Dawn +2 ammo, sure, that's the amp weapon for snipers. This is the Isaac buff I was mentioning earlier. He's finally gonna get a Mithril Bamboo, or Mithril Tonfa rather. It's gonna be coming with Zephyr, which is a pretty fat shield and movement speed increase with a very long cooldown, but often with Isaac, you just need the one good engage, and then you start zooming, and then since you get 200 shield, and then you one-shot your target, this will be really good. So I don't know how it compares to Frozen Echo. I'm pretty sure it's way better, but we'll see how the Isaacs decide. Another healer buff. Elfdress getting a +5 flat adaptability increase and a 5% attack speed increase. This is more of a revert from the previous season nerf to Elfdress, but still very scary. So I expect to see a lot of Charlottes, Johans, and Lennys in your next few games. Blue Flames getting a -2 defense nerf, very deserved. Kind of sad though, because Blue Flames was a kind of underutilized item in North America at least. GPNVG is getting a tiny buff, which kind of makes sense because the new Legatus weapon is completely overshadowing it. The real scary part is if GPNVG is going to get overbuffed to try and compete with Legatus when it has no right to do so because Legatus is a 4-square item. We have a few new Mage Bruiser items, which in my opinion are very, very understated. I don't really know if these are good, but they'll probably be buffed if they're not used. Veritas Lux Mea finally makes a return to Eternal Return. 5 defense, 40 amp, 100 HP. Pretty bad stats overall. You're better off going Burnish Aegis if you're trying to be tanky and be a mage. And then Lunar Embrace is the upgrade version of that, which is going to be Meteorite plus Iron Ball. It's going to be 10 defense, 50 amp, and 150 HP. And while it is a good bump in stats overall, again, I think you're going to struggle to find a reason to drop Burnish Aegis over this. You lose 7 defense and 50 HP in exchange for 50 amp, and I'll be honest, that's actually a pretty hard trade-off to make in my opinion, especially for a RNG item. So very understated. It will probably be buffed though, more sooner than later. Mythical Quiver, +2 AP. Sultan Adored, +2 AP. These are totally underused, so it makes sense. Dice of Destiny is going to lose 5 AP and gain 3 crit strike damage, which is funny just because this means it's more of a shuffle in stats. A lot of characters that use Dice of Destiny didn't really have the best AP ratios, but some characters did. So like Dailin might be sad about this because of her new ult nerf or ult buff. Won't be as well affected as Dice of Destiny, but honestly, it's probably fair change to make the auto attackers more auto attack focused. And Windwalker's one of the worst boot upgrades in the game, which I personally like just because I liked the look of it. It's getting healing reduction, which is going to be really nice for certain tanks that weren't able to get healing reduction otherwise. So like my Take Nikki build. And then a bunch of Cobalt changes that I don't really care too much about. And yeah, bug fixes. I'll slowly scroll through these in case you guys see something that's relevant to you. But that's going to be the video. Probably not as short as it could have been, especially since I am doing this just off of the website. But it is still a pretty hefty patch. So I hope you guys enjoy it. And yeah, see you guys next time for the Yumin first impressions, which will hopefully have actual content. So hope you guys have a good day or night wherever you are, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.